Tired of tempestuous, egocentric superstars? You're about to get a break. In this lecture, I'm turning first to our third High Renaissance superstar, Raphael Sanzio da Urbino. He was, according to numerous testimonies by contemporaries, a genuinely nice guy. Although he died young, at 37, Raphael left a large body of work. The School of Athens is probably his most famous painting and our required work, but you know the drill by now. I want you to see more. I thought you'd be especially interested in the self-portrait sketch he drew when he was just 14. Raphael was born and raised in Urbino under the reign of its warrior humanist duke, pictured above in a famous double portrait by an early Renaissance master whom, alas, we are otherwise passing over. His father was a court painter who apprenticed him to Perugino. Raphael's early works, as you can see, were heavily influenced by Perugino, whose painting of Christ handing the keys to St. Peter is on the left. I've cropped it to make the comparison easier. The similarities between the two paintings are pretty obvious, but what big difference do you notice? Raphael's painting has stronger colors and more distinct faces because he was painting in oil, not tempera. Light, bright colors tended to work better with fresco and with tempera, while one of the many advantages of oil was that layers of paint and glazes permitted deeper tones. Remember that the Italians are coming to know the great oil paintings of the Northern Renaissance, especially Jan van Eyck's. In his early 20s, Raphael left Urbino for Florence, and this painting dates from that period. Among Raphael's many admirable character traits was that he admired and happily borrowed from other great artists. You wouldn't catch Raphael trying to stick Michelangelo's David in a dark corner. And indeed, one reason why Michelangelo resented Raphael is that almost everyone liked Raphael better. So, which artist is Raphael channeling here? If you guessed Leonardo da Vinci, you're right. Notice the pyramidal composition and the setting of the Madonna in a beautiful landscape without halos or thrones. We also see chiaroscuro and even a hint of sfumato in the slightly blurred outlines. But Raphael's Madonnas, and he painted a lot of them, are sweeter and a little less mysterious than Leonardo's, and his setting is the gentler, less dramatic, and less fantastical landscape of his native Umbria. Here's a later Madonna painted toward the end of Raphael's sadly short life, when the painter had moved to Rome and gained Pope Julius II sponsorship. The kneeling saint, the early Christian Saint Sixtus, actually has the face of Julius II. Note the mystical setting and the greater three-dimensional bulk of the figures. But once again, Raphael is employing that highly stable triangular or pyramidal composition. I just note that the triangle also had theological significance because it referred back to the Trinity. The little angels on the bottom of that painting have become famous images, but again, they show Raphael's remarkable talent for capturing individual expression, and of course, they're very cute. So here are two Raphael portraits, and I actually love him as a portraitist. The portrait on the left is Castiglione, author of a famous book, The Courtier, which described the ideal Renaissance gentleman and was very influential. He and Raphael knew each other. I love the piercing eyes, the exquisitely rendered textures of the cloth. Raphael was paying attention to what painters were up to in Flanders. I included the portrait of a woman because Raphael, unlike our previous two superstars, preferred women to men in his personal life, and I think he paints women with great sensitivity and affection. So here's another late work by Raphael. So what developments do you see in Raphael's work? The composition is still pyramidal, especially Galatea's body, but there is much more movement here, especially when you compare it to the earlier Madonna in the Meadow. So which painter is Raphael channeling now? Oh, all right. So on the left, we see our Delphic Sibyl. Raphael's Galatea looks more like a woman, but the twisted torso and dynamic pose show Raphael's debt to Michelangelo. Raphael was a lot more generous about acknowledging his influences, by the way, and he even immortalized some of his fellow artists in his most famous painting. Here it is. Finally, our required Raphael work, The School of Athens. Raphael moved to Rome in 1508, and he would spend the last 12 years of his life there working for two popes, Julius II and his successor Leo X, who was, by the way, the second son of Lorenzo de' Medici. Julius II immediately commissioned Raphael to produce frescoes for what was intended to become the Pope's private rooms at the Vatican Palace. This fresco was painted for the Sala della Signatura, now the room where the Pope signs official documents. But when Raphael was painting this room, it was actually Julius II's private library, and the paintings reflected that Pope's wide intellectual interests, as well as his belief that classical and Christian ideas could and should be reconciled. So, you read an excellent textbook discussion of the School of Athens and watched a Khan Academy video on the work, or at least I hope you did. But one danger of this laser-like focus on the philosophy fresco, it's easy to forget that it was just one of 4 paintings in Pope Julius's library. He also commissioned frescoes portraying poetry, jurisprudence, or law and theology. Binding these together was the theme of wisdom, which Pope Julius II saw as emanating from all of these sources. So let's watch a video clip that talks about the theology panel. That was the first one that Raphael painted, and then we'll go back to the School of Athens. Well, I thought the same video presented an interesting analysis of the School of Athens and provided somewhat different information than the textbook or Khan Academy video. This is going to be the main discussion of this work today, so don't tune out, okay? I'll just quickly recap a few points. One of the many reasons why art historians love this painting is they get to play Spot the Famous Guy. Here are a few famous contemporaries of Raphael masquerading as Greek sages. And here in the middle is Raphael himself. Sorry, I should have found a better image for that. As your textbook notes, Plato is pointing to the heavens, reflecting his more abstract concerns, while Aristotle, more grounded in the world, is pointing to the earth. The red of Plato's tunic symbolizes fire, which rises up. The brown symbolizes earth. And here we get some sense of the entire room, and again, the range of the Pope's intellectual interests. Now that we've sped through Raphael, we're going to really speed through Venice. So Venice is different from the rest of Italy. During the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, its fortunes were built on maritime trade with the East, and Venice's ties to Byzantium were stronger than anywhere else in Italy. Venetians of the upper classes did not attend humanist academies. They went off to sea as boys. As a result, the interests of the ruling class tended to be less intellectual, more focused on nature, and perhaps a little more sensual as well. But above all, Venice was and is a city bathed in light. Light bouncing off its canals, light reflecting from the mosaics that decorated its Byzantine-style churches, including St. Mark's, and light shining through its most famous product, which was glass. So no, this is not a Renaissance painting. It's an Impressionist painting of Venice by Monet, but I like it because it captures Venice's extraordinary light. And okay, I couldn't resist. Here's another Monet, this time a sunset. So let's turn to today's second video for a discussion of Venice and its art. Well, I'm going to quickly show you a few paintings by famous Venetian artists who have disappeared from the course, and I'm going to start with Bellini. So pay attention to how these painters use color and light. Let me just note that the ever-grumpy Michelangelo accused Venetian painters of paying too little attention to drawing. Sure, they were masters of color and paint, but what about line? What about shape? Why couldn't they draw? See if you agree with Michelangelo's criticism. So here we can compare Bellini's painting with Raphael's Marriage of the Virgin. They both use oil paintings, and both artists use colorful masterfully. But Bellini, typical of the Venetian painters, used softer, layered colors. Raphael's oil painting still in some ways resembles tempera with its sharp, bright colors. Like Van Eyck and Leonardo, the Venetians explored the potential of oil paint for producing more subtle gradations of color. Notice, too, the much more powerful role played by light in the Bellini painting. The two saints in the foreground, St. Peter and St. Jerome, are cast into shadow. The Virgin and Child are bathed in a light that actually seems to be coming from a real source. We will see much more of this when we get to Baroque art. With this painting by Giorgione, we again see that subtle gradation of colors and the play of light and shadow, but this painting also represents another important aspect of Venetian art. I've already said the Venetians were less focused on the intellect, more focused on the senses. Nature played a more central role in many Venetian paintings. Here's what is called a pastoral mood. There's a romantic, sentimental feel to this that, to my mind, recalls Botticelli, but with softer lines and colors. By the way, this painting's juxtaposition of nude females and clothed men would be copied by many later artists, which is one reason I'm showing it to you. So Titian is the last of our superstars, but since I'm running out of time, he is not going to get the attention he deserves. Titian painted this self-portrait when he was about 70 years old. He had a long, rich career, and there are lots of Titians out there for you to see, which is a treat in store for you. Titian began his artistic career apprenticed to a mosaicist, and that may contribute to his use of reflective light, but then he went on to work for Bellini. Eventually, he became the most sought-after painter in Europe. He worked for kings, for emperors throughout Europe, and, of course, for popes. So this masterwork was actually Titian's first major composition. The brilliant light shows Titian's mosaic past and also the Venetians' debt to Byzantine art, but the combination of stability and movement is characteristic of the High Renaissance, especially Michelangelo. Again, you see the strong colors, the vibrant light of Venetian painting combined with Titian's superb skills as a portraitist. To my mind, this is one of the most beautiful and human Marys in Italian art. Notice, too, the foreshortening of God the Father. Titian had learned from his fellow Italian masters. This is another monumental painting, more than 16 feet high. But what's different about Titian's pyramid? It's off-center, drawing our attention to a diagonal that begins with the portrait of the patron, kneeling before the Virgin, passes over St. Peter, and then focuses in on the brilliantly lit mother and child. The perspective is also off-center. If we followed the orthogonal lines of the steps, they'd actually intersect at a vanishing point to the left of the canvas, and this is quite different from other earlier Renaissance works, such as Masaccio's Tribute Money or Leonardo's Last Supper, in which the vanishing point lies at the center of the painting, in an area of primary visual importance. Titian was not afraid to play around with perspective and point of view. Titian also loved to paint pastoral scenes and mythological scenes. This painting combines the two. It's based on a Greek myth. Jupiter falls in love with the princess Europa. He takes on the form of a beautiful white bull, persuades the girl to climb up on his back. As soon as she does, he makes for the sea and takes her off to Crete, where, well, you can figure out the rest. The result was King Midas and the birth of European civilization, and the continent, in fact, was named after this princess. But the reason I included this painting was that I found this juxtaposition on the internet. On the right, we see a close-up of the section of Europa's clothing that's marked out by the triangle on the left. This gives us an opportunity to observe Titian's brushstrokes. It's harder to identify brushstrokes than, say, a painting by Van Eyck. They're small, meticulous, well-blended, and really largely hidden. The term art critics use for this kind of brushstroke is tight. Titian employed looser brushstrokes, often large swaths of paint that can be readily identified. The term art critics use for this is loose brushstrokes, and we'll see a lot more of this in our next unit. Okay, on to our required work. I borrowed the slide, and when I tried to make it more readable, I just got messed up, so let's live with it. As the diagrams indicate, this painting has an interesting composition, an inverted pyramid. Oops, there we go. Sorry about that. With diagonals that are connected both by line and by color. Notice how the two smaller figures on the right balance the reclining nude, as do the red of her cushion and her serving woman's hair. Remember, too, that red and green are complementary colors that draw the eye. Sorry, that got a little messed up. We don't actually know that the Venus of Urbino was Venus. The title was added later, but it's interesting to compare these two paintings because they say something about the ideal of beauty in Renaissance Italy. Note that both women have small, firm breasts and swelling stomachs, and that, unlike Michelangelo's women, they don't seem to have much muscle tone. The Italians also admired blondes, even though most Italian women had dark hair. But if this is a Venus, Titian has taken a huge leap by putting her into a domestic setting, filled with details about an upper-class Venetian room, again, shades of the Northern Renaissance. In part, this shows the influence of the Northern painters whose work Titian would have known well. So Titian's paintings of naked women greatly influenced later artists. We're going to stay tuned for Rubens. The painting on the bottom right, made 400 years later, was a direct homage to Titian's work, and it will be one of our required works in another month or so. So I'd like to close with one last, rather long video segment that talks about both works. I was very intrigued by this art critic's discussion of how historians' view of this work changed over time. That's a very relevant issue given the current College Board preoccupation. So I hope you have time. Warning, the really important part comes at the end, and it is not every art historian's view of the painting, but it's an interesting theory and a reminder that there are lots of theories out there. I figure that frees us up a little to come up with our own.